Lucas. Lucas. I heard a voice calling my name over and over again. I heard it distantly at first, as if I was underwater, and someone was whispering on the surface. Lucas! It was me. I was yelling my own name. I was just remembering it, and I was, in fact, underwater. In a flash, I came back to my senses, and everything started making sense at an alarming pace. My body acted on pure instinct. My brain was fully in survival mode. I didn't care about who I was and what had happened to me. My entire being was focused on one thing only: surviving. Despite my widely scattered thoughts, my great confusion, the unfamiliar feeling of my body suddenly waking up, and a really strange feeling around my neck, I started swimming. I was completely lost at first, but when I saw a light, I moved desperately toward it. I flailed and I moved my arms and legs so aggressively they started aching, and my lungs started to burn. I was just starting to fear I wouldn't make it. I would drown right then and there, without even knowing why I was in the water in the first place. Then finally, I made it to the surface. That first intake of breath was glorious, but there was also something terribly ominous about it. Because with clear lungs and feeling mildly out of danger, my brain hurried to catch me up on everything I had ignored so far. The shock of the realization was so strong that I felt faint. I went limp and went underwater again for a second before my brain recovered once more. Instead of staying afloat until my brain short-circuited again, I started swimming to the closest shore. The steady movement of my limbs was somewhat soothing, and it allowed me to think about what the hell had happened to me. My memories flashed behind my eyes. War. That's the first thing that came to my mind. A war had been going on for months? Years? It hardly mattered because it was going to be an endless war. Because there was no goal but complete world domination. And last I remember, they were doing really well. It all started with a man, a scientist, a mad scientist, as some people used to call him. Raymond Hollis was an English scientist, expelled from every reputable university, laboratory, and company. After a little too many failed experiments that went against the law, against morality, or against common fucking sense. He didn't give up though, but at first, it seemed that he did. The infamous man disappeared for years. Nobody knew more about him until, one day, a strange riot started up in Belgium. The authorities struggled to stop it because not only the people involved fought with the ferocity of beasts that have nothing to lose, but after a while, the police switched sides, and eventually, so did the military. In a matter of days, Belgium was under the control of a single man and his very particular army. Before mass media was neutralized, the images of the riots showed all the people wearing black masks over half of their faces. But when the few images and videos were further analyzed, and when this lethal army started crossing over the Belgian borders, we all saw it. People's faces weren't covered with simple masks. There was something unknown and unexplainable covering their faces. As the army grew and this mad villain started taking over France first, we learned so much more, and we learned everything the hard way. Raymond Hollis had created, despite warnings, logic, and all the odds, a substance that infiltrates the human brain to deprive the subjects of their free will. The result? He could turn anybody into a perfect soldier that would obey his every wish. We didn't know much more about this creation. We didn't have time. The world entered a state of collective panic. Other countries sent their armies to help France, and then Germany, but one after the other. Everyone died to join that mindless army. And then my memories were over. I reached the shore. I lay on the sand, and my hands shook as I moved them to my neck. There it was, the mask, the weapon, the mind-numbing substance. I immediately started crying when I realized what had happened. I was captured. I was recruited. Who knows for how long I served that fucking army? But why was I conscious again? My hands desperately reached for my neck and gripped that intruding presence and yanked it away hard. I was surprised that it worked. I pulled it away from me and threw it at the ground. I was breathing heavily, and I recoiled from it, fearing it would get me again. However, nothing happened. And the more I stared at it, the more something started making sense. When people talked about a mind-controlling substance, we pictured maybe a virus in a pill that you would have to ingest. But this thing, it looked alive. Well, at the moment it looked dead. I took a risk and stepped on it lightly with my foot. The thing expelled dirty water from its pores. It spasmed and spewed more water, but finally rested limply on the sand. It frighteningly resembled a squid, but it was a deep black unlike any other living thing. That was it. This thing had been alive. It wasn't a mask. It was a scientifically created organism that adhered itself to people's faces, and that's when they lost all real consciousness. But that didn't matter as much as what I had discovered. This thing, being alive, could also die. When I was drowning, it drowned before me. And now I was free, but was I, really? I had my free will and consciousness back, but this also meant that I noticed the sound of footsteps approaching, and knew I had to be afraid. I considered running away, but weren't we at war? Wouldn't that give them a reason to kill me? I looked up and saw two silhouettes getting closer and closer. I looked around me for the first time and took note of my surroundings. I was in a river. There was a bridge above and a long line of people crossing it. I suspected I fell from it. Then there were those two people getting even closer now, close enough for me to see the tense and identical way in which they moved, and the black mass that covered half of their faces. Was this thing really dead? I acted on impulse and picked up the black squid-like thing. It really felt lifeless on my hands. It was damp and cold, but still somewhat sticky. So when the strangers were near, I took a deep breath and held it in as I stuck that creature on my face again. It was a disgusting feeling, and I struggled to make it work, but it eventually stuck. I placed it slightly under my nose, just in case, but nothing happened. Nothing at all this time. I was still me. I still had my consciousness.
"Soldier,"
one of the strangers greeted me with an emotionless voice.
"confirm if you are dead or alive."
I'm alive," I stuttered, overcome with fear.
"Follow us back to the line. We are going back to the headquarters for the night,"
he stated.
"Soldiers must not leave the line. Soldiers must follow orders at all times. Every display of individuality must be eradicated immediately."
The second soldier started reciting a series of orders as they walked me back to the line.
"Soldiers must never try to take off their masks. Civilians will be ignored unless identified as threats. Soldiers must remain stationary until receiving an order. Soldiers must not leave the line. Soldiers must never try to take off their masks."
He went on, and I took the opportunity to study their faces. Two completely normal men, except for the black, gooey mask covering their mouth and nose. It could be their own breathing, sure, but from my own point of view, It looked like that invasive organism was breathing, filling up with air and exhaling, unlike the limp thing stuck over my mouth. One of them just repeated orders again and again, but the other one, the first one, had a sort of earpiece on his right ear. I guess that's where he received his own personal instructions to deliver to this brainless crowd around him. I was reasonably nervous as I joined the lines of 1,000 mindless soldiers. However, I soon realized that lack of free will also mean nobody around me noticed things that weren't part of their orders. So nobody noticed I looked and acted differently. Nobody reacted. Nobody noticed me. The realization was bone-chilling. There I was, walking among hundreds of people, and I was taken as meaningless. I don't know what's worse. Being one of these mind-controlled soldiers, or having realized that I'm the only one who broke free from being controlled. They looked to be from all genders, ages, body types, ethnicities, and walks of life. Yet, none of that mattered now. The people they used to be didn't matter anymore. They were soldiers. They were nothing but bodies dragged into war without their consent, without so much as their awareness. Who knew how many had died already? Who knew what our homes were like anymore? Our brains certainly had been used and neutralized. It was an unimaginable fate. It was a world without souls. The sound of countless footsteps falling rhythmically over the bridge was beyond unsettling. Their empty eyes, their helplessness. But halfway through the bridge, I noticed a considerable hole in the wood underneath us. That must have been where I fell down. I could have died, but really, that fall saved me. Almost drowning killed the monstrosity over my face, and I was approaching that one-in-a-lifetime opportunity again, but I didn't need it anymore. What about the people around me, though? What could I do with this knowledge? What can I do with my freedom? What can I do for a world that consumes itself in a war without goals and without a finish line? How can it be of service to humanity if it lost everything that made it human? When I reached the opening on the floor of the bridge, I took an extra step to discreetly push the person in front of me down to the water. They knocked the broken wooden panel, but started falling down. I stopped to watch them fall, and it made the person walking behind me knock against my back. In a split-second decision, I took them by the shoulders, wondered about who they were behind the mask, and pushed them to the hole on the bridge too. When I heard the bodies splashing on the water, it sounded like freedom. I didn't have time.
Every display of individuality must be eradicated immediately.
The high-ranked soldiers would show up at any second and shoot me without hesitation, but this was all I had. I took my only chance, my last hope, and started pushing people down to the water, let them fall down the hole, pushed them over the edge of the bridge, dragged them down, as many as I could, as fast as I could. I was barely starting to remember my life, where I'm from, my childhood, the face of my mother, my best friend's birthday, my favorite coffee shop. I was throwing people over the bridge, wondering about their names, their favorite movies, their dreams and nightmares, if they ever fell in love, and the lives they had. When the soldiers started shooting me, there was no salvation for me. But as I started to lose my consciousness, this time forever, I could hear splashes below me, people swimming to the shore, people like me, realizing the catastrophe around me, people coming together to connect the dots. I was dying, and humanity's hope was only waking up.